Imagine walking into a room where everyone is arguing. Voices raised, fingers pointed, egos on fire. It's loud, it's intense, and at first glance it looks like a battle of intellects, a grand clash of ideas. But let's pause for a second. What if I told you that all this noise, all this debating and desperate need to prove a point isn't actually a display of strength? What if arguing isn't the mark of intelligence, but rather a sign of something much weaker? Something insecure? Now I get it. Society has trained us to think that the ability to argue well is a sign of power, that the loudest voice wins, that the person who can dismantle someone else's perspective with sharp words must be the smartest in the room. It's a tempting belief, right? After all, who doesn't want to come out on top in a heated debate? But Nietzsche, one of the most provocative thinkers in history, saw things differently. He believed that true strength doesn't come from overpowering others. It comes from mastering yourself. And here's the kicker. Most arguments don't actually stem from wisdom. They stem from weakness. Think about it. Why do people argue? Sure, sometimes it's about ideas, but more often than not, it's about something deeper. A need to be right, a need to be respected, a need to feel in control. These aren't signs of strength. They're signs of insecurity. A truly strong person doesn't need to shout to be heard. They don't need to prove themselves to everyone they meet. Their confidence is so deeply rooted that they can let go of the need for external validation. That's what Nietzsche meant when he rejected the obsession with arguing. He wasn't saying you should be passive, or that you should never stand up for yourself. He was saying that the strongest people don't waste their energy on petty disputes. They understand that arguing rarely changes minds, it only reinforces egos. So before we dive deeper, let's start with a simple challenge. The next time you feel the urge to argue, ask yourself, am I doing this out of strength or out of insecurity? Because at the end of the day, the most powerful people aren't the ones who fight to be heard. They're the ones who are so solid in who they are that they don't need to. Let's explore why. All right, let's get real for a second. Why do people argue? No, really, what's the actual reason? Most of the time, it's not about truth. It's not about justice. And it's definitely not about wisdom. It's about ego. Let's break it down. You ever notice how people argue as if their entire self-worth is on the line? Like losing a debate is the same as losing their dignity? That's because in many ways it is, at least to their fragile ego. See, most people aren't actually looking for truth when they argue. They're looking for validation. They want to be seen as intelligent, as strong, as right. Because deep down, there's a fear. What if I'm wrong? What if I don't know as much as I think I do? What if people don't respect me? That fear? That's insecurity talking. Nietzsche understood this well. He knew that people cling to their beliefs not because they're true, but because those beliefs make them feel safe. When someone challenges that safety, boom, defensiveness kicks in. The argument isn't about logic anymore, it's about identity. But here's the real question. Does proving a point actually make you stronger? No. Winning an argument doesn't magically make you more intelligent or more powerful. It just makes you seem like you are, for a moment. But real strength? That comes from not needing to argue in the first place. A truly confident person doesn't feel the need to convince everyone around them. They don't need applause or approval. They know who they are, and that's enough. And that brings us to something even deeper. Ever notice how some people spend their entire lives reacting to things? Someone offends them and they lash out. Someone disagrees with them and they scramble to argue back. It's exhausting. It's also weak. Nietzsche had a term for this, ressentiment. It's that bitter, reactive energy that drives people to define themselves against something rather than for something. Think about it. Most arguments aren't about creating something new. They're about tearing something down. Weak people define themselves by what they oppose. They argue to prove someone else wrong, to attack an idea they hate, to show the world what they stand against. But what do they actually stand for? That part is usually unclear. Strong individuals, on the other hand, they don't waste time on reactionary battles. They build. They create. They focus their energy on becoming something greater rather than getting tangled in endless disputes. And that's what makes them truly powerful. But there's another layer to this. Let's talk about the herd mentality. Nietzsche had a serious issue with the way society pressures people to think the same way, believe the same things, and follow the same rules. And one of the ways this pressure works? Through argument. Most debates aren't about truth. They're about enforcing conformity. Ever had an opinion that went against the crowd? What happens? People don't just disagree with you, they try to argue you into submission. They demand that you explain yourself. They pressure you, challenge you, sometimes even mock you. Why? Because your independence is a threat. The herd survives by making sure everyone moves in the same direction. And one of the best ways to control people? Make them feel like they have to argue for their beliefs. Because the second you engage in that argument, you're already on the defensive. You're already playing their game. And before you know it, you're exhausted, frustrated, and maybe even doubting yourself. Not because you were wrong, but because you were pressured into thinking you had to prove yourself. But here's the truth. You don't owe anyone an argument. True independence means thinking for yourself without needing anyone's approval. Nietzsche believed that the strongest people aren't the ones who fight the hardest in debates. They're the ones who don't need to fight at all. Because the real battle, it's not out there. It's in here. Yeah, I just pointed to my head. Master your own mind and you won't need to argue. You'll just be. And that's real power. All right, that's the psychological side of things. See how deep this goes? This isn't just about winning or losing an argument. It's about why we even feel the need to argue in the first place, and how recognizing that impulse can set us free. Next, let's get into something even more fascinating. Nietzsche's idea of strength, the Overman, and why the truly powerful don't waste time in debates. Let's go. All right, let's talk about what real strength looks like. Not the kind of strength that comes from yelling the loudest or proving someone wrong in a debate, but the kind that actually makes you powerful. And to do that, we need to introduce one of Nietzsche's biggest ideas, the Overman, Übermensch. Now, if you're not familiar with the Overman, let me break it down for you. The Overman is the next level of human evolution, not biologically, but mentally, philosophically, and spiritually. It's the kind of person who doesn't just follow society's rules, but creates their own values and lives by them. And guess what? The Overman doesn't waste time in petty arguments. Why? Because arguing is about approval. It's about trying to convince someone else that you're right, that your beliefs are superior, that your way of thinking is the correct one. And that's exactly what the Overman doesn't care about. See, most people live their lives seeking validation. They want to be liked, respected, and seen as intelligent. But Nietzsche's Overman? They transcend that. They don't need validation because their focus is on something bigger, self-overcoming. That means constantly challenging yourself, improving yourself, and evolving beyond who you were yesterday. And let's be real, if you're focused on becoming the best version of yourself, do you really have time to waste arguing with someone who refuses to change their mind? The Overman doesn't argue. They act. Their life, their work, their achievements, that's their argument. And it's way more powerful than any debate. But this raises an important question. If arguing isn't real power, what is? This is where most people get things twisted. They think power is about control, about dominating others, winning arguments, making people see things their way. But that's not power. That's insecurity in disguise. True power? It's not about controlling others. It's about mastering yourself. Think about it. If you constantly need to prove yourself to others, you're actually dependent on them. Their opinions, their reactions, their approval, that's what fuels you. That's not power. That's weakness. Nietzsche understood that most people argue because they feel empty inside. There's a void. Maybe it's a lack of confidence, a fear of being wrong, or just an unresolved sense of insecurity. And instead of dealing with that, they try to fill the void by dominating others in debate. But the truth is, real strength fills itself. When you're truly strong, you don't need to argue. You don't need to prove yourself. You're so secure in who you are that other people's opinions stop mattering. And that's when you become truly powerful, because once you stop wasting your energy on meaningless disputes, you can start using that energy to build something real. Which brings us to the most important part. Now we get to Nietzsche's core principle, the will to power. Forget everything you've heard about power before. This isn't about politics, control, or brute force. The will to power is about the fundamental drive of life itself, the need to grow, to expand, to create. And this is where Nietzsche drops a bombshell. Most people waste their energy on conflict instead of creation. Think about all the arguments you've seen, online and real life, between people who spend hours trying to win a debate. What actually comes out of those arguments? Usually nothing. They don't change the world. They don't create anything meaningful. They just burn up energy in a battle of egos. Now imagine if all that energy was spent on something greater, Imagine if, instead of fighting to be right, people use that energy to write a book, start a business, master a skill, build something that lasts. That's the difference between weak people and truly strong individuals. Weak people argue because they have nothing else to offer. Strong people create because they don't need to argue. That's the will to power in action. It's not about crushing others, it's about surpassing yourself. It's about becoming so powerful through your actions that arguments become irrelevant. Because at the end of the day, no amount of debating can replace what you actually accomplish in life. So here's the real question. Are you spending your energy proving yourself to others, or are you using it to become something greater? The choice is yours. But if Nietzsche were here, he'd tell you this. The strongest people don't argue. They build. So let's stop talking. Let's start creating. All right, let's get straight to it. Why do people argue so much if it almost never changes anything? Seriously. When was the last time you saw an argument actually lead to someone saying, "You know what? You're right. I've completely changed my mind"? Rare, isn't it? That's because most arguments aren't about discovering truth. They're about defending identities. Nietzsche saw through this game. He knew that most arguments are pointless, not because truth doesn't matter, but because truth itself is a slippery thing. Let's break this down. This is one of Nietzsche's most famous and most misunderstood ideas. When he said there are no facts, only interpretations, he wasn't saying reality doesn't exist. He wasn't some postmodern thinker claiming that nothing is real. What he meant was we never access reality directly. We only ever see it through the lens of our own perspective. Everything we know, our beliefs, our values, our sense of what's true is shaped by our upbringing, our experiences, our emotions, the culture we were raised in. Two people can look at the exact same situation and see completely different things. Why? Because they're bringing different interpretations to the table. Now, here's where the futility of argument comes in. If truth is just interpretation, what's the point of arguing about it? When two people argue, they're not actually fighting over facts. They're fighting over perspectives, and perspectives aren't things you can just win like a game of chess. Instead of trying to force others into your worldview, Nietzsche would say, expand your own. The truly wise person isn't the one who argues their truth the loudest. It's the one who can see from multiple angles. That's real power. And once you embrace that, you start to see how pointless most debates really are. But there's another reason arguments don't work. Let's be honest. Most arguments don't change minds. They just make people dig in their heels. Psychologists have a term for this. It's called the backfire effect. When people are confronted with facts or arguments that challenge their beliefs, they don't usually change their minds. They double down. Instead of thinking, wow, maybe I was wrong, they think, I need to defend my position even harder. Why? Because changing your mind feels like admitting weakness, and most people would rather protect their ego than seek actual truth. Nietzsche understood this before modern psychology even had a name for it. He knew that most arguments are just two people reinforcing their own biases while pretending they're engaging in some grand intellectual debate. And today, social media has made this worse than ever. Think about how online debates work. Someone makes a statement. Someone else attacks it. They go back and forth, each side convinced they're winning. At the end of the day, nobody changes their mind, but both sides feel superior. It's not about truth, it's about ego maintenance. Nietzsche would say, why waste your energy? Real power isn't in proving someone wrong. It's in having the wisdom to know when persuasion is impossible and walking away. And that brings us to something even more powerful. Here's a radical idea. Sometimes the strongest response is no response at all. I know this goes against everything we're taught. We're told that staying silent means we're weak, that we're backing down. But Nietzsche saw things differently. Silence isn't submission, it's mastery. Think about it. A person who argues back immediately is reactive. A person who stays silent is in control. That's power. Silence sends a clear message. I don't need to prove myself. I don't owe you a reaction. Your words don't affect me. And let's be real, what's more unsettling than someone who refuses to engage? Most people argue because they crave a reaction. Take that away from them, and they lose all their power. Nietzsche believed that the strongest individuals are the ones who don't get pulled into every conflict. They choose their battles wisely. They understand that not every disagreement is worth their time. Silence is a flex. It shows that you're so secure in yourself that you don't need to fight for approval. And that That's real strength. At the end of the day, Nietzsche's message is clear. Arguments are usually a waste of time. Why? Because truth is subjective. It's all about interpretation. Persuasion is an illusion. Most people just dig deeper into their beliefs. Silence is power. The strongest people don't need to argue. So here's the real question. What are you spending your energy on? Are you wasting it trying to win debates that go nowhere? Or are you using it to grow, to build, to become something greater? Because the truth is, the people who get caught up in endless arguments aren't the ones changing the world. The ones who stay focused, who put their energy into action instead of empty words, they're the ones who rise above. So next time you feel the urge to argue, pause. Ask yourself, is this worth my time? If the answer is no, walk away. Not because you're weak, but because you're too strong to waste your energy on things that don't matter. That's Nietzsche's wisdom, and that's real power. All right, let's flip the script. Up until now, we've talked about why arguing is pointless, how it's more about ego than truth, how it rarely changes minds, and how silence can be more powerful than words. But that doesn't mean we should never engage in meaningful conversations. Nietzsche wasn't saying, shut up and ignore everyone. He was saying, be intentional with your energy. Know the difference between empty argument and real dialogue. So let's talk about the alternative to arguing, the art of dialogue. Here's the fundamental distinction. Argument is about winning. Dialogue is about understanding. When people argue, it's usually a battle of egos. It's not about finding truth, it's about proving yourself, defending your pride, or making the other person submit. Dialogue, on the other hand, it's a different game entirely. Argument is rigid. It's about holding on to your position. Dialogue is fluid. It's about exploring ideas. Argument creates division. It makes people dig in their heels. Dialogue creates connection. It opens up new perspectives. And here's the funny thing. When you stop treating conversations like a battlefield, you actually learn a lot more. Think about the best conversations you've ever had. They probably weren't shouting matches. They were exchanges of ideas, where you left with something new to think about. That's dialogue. And the secret to making it work? Transcending ego. Let's be honest, this is the hard part. It's easy to argue, it's easy to get defensive. What's hard is actually listening. But here's the thing, you don't grow by proving yourself right. You grow by being open to what you don't know. So how do you get out of your own way? Listen with curiosity, not defensiveness. Most people listen just so they can respond. They're not actually hearing the other person. They're waiting for their turn to talk. That's not listening. That's strategizing. A better approach? Listen like you might actually learn something. That doesn't mean you have to agree. But it does mean you should pause long enough to ask yourself, is there something here I haven't considered? Ask more questions. You want to shift from arguing to dialogue? Start asking more questions. Instead of saying, that's wrong, try. That's interesting. Why do you see it that way? Instead of, that makes no sense, try. I never thought of it like that. What led you to that conclusion? See what happens? The energy shifts. Instead of clashing, you're exploring. And when you do this, something amazing happens. People stop feeling the need to defend themselves and they actually start thinking. Drop the need to win. This is the biggest one. If you go into every conversation trying to be right, you're already losing. Because when you're obsessed with winning, you close yourself off from the possibility of growth. Nietzsche would tell you, the real win isn't proving yourself. It's evolving. So instead of seeing conversations as battles, see them as chances to expand your perspective. Which brings us to the final and most practical part. Okay, so we get it. Arguments are about ego, dialogue is about growth. But how do you actually apply this in real life? Pick your battles. Not every disagreement needs to be a discussion. Sometimes walking away is the best move. But when you do engage, do it with purpose. Ask yourself, am I trying to understand or just prove a point? Is this conversation moving me forward or just draining my energy? Am I open to learning something new or just defending what I already believe? If you can't answer those questions honestly, you're probably just arguing for the sake of it. Shift from reacting to reflecting. One of Nietzsche's core ideas was self-overcoming, the ability to rise above your impulses and grow beyond your limitations. And one of the biggest ways to practice this? Stop reacting. Start reflecting. The next time someone says something that triggers you, pause. Instead of snapping back, take a breath. Instead of instantly defending yourself, ask, why does this bother me? Instead of arguing, reflect, what can I learn from this moment? That small pause? That's power. That's self-mastery in action. Lead by example. Here's the thing. You can't force people to have better conversations, but you can show them how it's done. When others get defensive, stay open. When they attack, stay calm. When they try to win, choose to understand instead. Not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough not to let your ego control you. And that's rare. That's powerful. That's Nietzsche's wisdom in action. Nietzsche wasn't against conversation. He was against pointless battles of pride. He believed that true strength isn't in shouting the loudest, but in thinking the deepest. So next time you're about to argue, ask yourself, am I here to win or am I here to grow? Am I stuck in my ego or am I open to new perspectives? Is this conversation making me better or just keeping me stuck? Because at the end of the day, real power isn't in dominating others. It's in mastering yourself. That's the path of the Overman. That's the path of wisdom, and that's how you transcend the noise. All right, we've established that arguing is usually pointless, an ego game that drains energy without leading to real change. But here's the thing. Conflict itself isn't the enemy. Nietzsche wasn't against struggle. In fact, he believed struggle was essential to becoming strong. The key is knowing how to engage with conflict in a way that helps you grow, rather than just reacting out of pride. So let's go deeper. Let's talk about Nietzsche's alternative to arguing, how conflict can actually make you better if you know how to use it. Here's something Nietzsche understood that most people don't. Growth doesn't happen in comfort. Think about the strongest, most capable people you know. Did they get that way by avoiding difficulty? No. They became who they are because they struggled, because they faced challenges head-on, because they endured. But here's where most people go wrong. They waste their struggle on pointless arguments instead of meaningful transformation. Nietzsche believed that instead of using conflict to win against others, we should use it to refine ourselves. Every disagreement, every criticism, every challenge we face, it's all an opportunity to become sharper, stronger, and more self-aware. When you argue just to prove a point, you're fighting the wrong battle. The real battle is against your own limitations, your ego, your fears, your resistance to change. Because if the fight isn't making you stronger, it's just making you tired. Now, here's one of Nietzsche's most powerful ideas. Amor fati, love of fate. Most people only want to accept the good parts of life. They want success, admiration, smooth conversations where everyone agrees with them. But Nietzsche, he said you have to embrace all of it, even the struggle, even the criticism, even the things that challenge you. Why? Because everything that happens to you is raw material for your growth. Someone criticizes you? Good. Now you have a chance to reflect and improve. Someone disagrees with you? Good. Now you get to sharpen your thinking. Life throws obstacles in your way? Good. Now you get to build resilience. Most people resist conflict. They see it as an interruption to their plans, an attack on their identity. But Nietzsche would say, stop resisting, start embracing. Because when you love your fate, when you see everything as part of your path, you become untouchable. Instead of taking disagreements personally, you see them as necessary parts of your evolution. You stop getting offended. You stop reacting emotionally. You stop wasting energy fighting against reality. And here's the paradox. When you stop resisting, conflict stops feeling like a burden. It becomes fuel. So instead of avoiding difficult conversations, instead of shutting down when someone challenges you, instead of getting defensive, lean in. See what it has to teach you. That's what it means to truly own your fate. Now, let's wrap this up with one of Nietzsche's most mind-blowing ideas, the eternal recurrence. It's a thought experiment, and it goes like this. Imagine a demon comes to you one night and says, everything you have ever experienced, you will live it again. Over and over. Not just once, but for eternity. Every choice, every action, every argument, you will repeat it exactly as it happened. Forever. Now pause. Really think about that. If you had to relive your life infinitely, would you be proud of how you're spending your time? Would you be happy knowing you wasted hours, days, years locked in pointless arguments? Would you want to look back and see yourself reacting, defending, getting caught up in ego-driven conflicts? Or would you want to see yourself growing, building, transforming, living? This is Nietzsche's ultimate test. If you had to live this life on repeat, would you still make the same choices? If the answer is no, then it's time to start making different choices. Instead of wasting time proving yourself, invest time improving yourself. Instead of getting stuck in cycles of defensiveness, break free and focus on what actually matters. Instead of fighting battles that lead nowhere, channel that energy into becoming someone you respect. Because at the end of the day, your life is yours to shape. And Nietzsche's challenge is simple. Make it a life worth repeating. Conflict is inevitable. People will challenge you. Life will test you. But you get to decide, will you use conflict as a tool for growth, or will you waste it on arguments that go nowhere? Will you embrace everything life throws at you, or will you fight against it and exhaust yourself? Will you build a life that, if repeated for eternity, you would be proud to live? Nietzsche's wisdom is clear. Struggle is fuel. Use it wisely. Because real strength isn't found in arguing, it's found in transformation. And that's a battle worth fighting. All right, we've covered a lot. We've dismantled the illusion that arguing makes you powerful. We've explored Nietzsche's idea that real strength comes from self-mastery, not proving yourself to others. We've looked at how conflict can be a tool for growth, rather than a battlefield for the ego. So now, let's tie it all together with the final and most important lesson. If you want to live powerfully, if you want to embody true strength, stop trying to prove your worth through words. Live it through action. Most people go through life constantly explaining themselves, justifying their beliefs, arguing about what's right and wrong, defending their choices. But here's the truth. You don't owe the world an explanation. Nietzsche believed that the highest form of strength isn't in winning arguments. It's in living your truth so fully that argument becomes unnecessary. Think about the most powerful figures in history. The visionaries. The people who truly changed the game. Did they waste their energy debating their worth? No, they just did the work. They built. They created. They embodied their philosophy instead of arguing about it. Because here's the thing. The truth that is lived is stronger than the truth that is spoken. When you reach a point where you no longer need to prove yourself, where you simply are who you are, unapologetically, unshaken, that's when you've truly arrived. That's when you stop reacting to the noise around you and start leading by example. And that brings us to the final, most powerful takeaway. Nietzsche's ultimate lesson? You don't need to argue for your beliefs. Your life should be the argument. Want to prove you're strong? Show it through your actions. Want to prove you're wise? Live with depth and purpose. Want to prove your values matter? Live by them so completely that others can't ignore them. The people who argue the most often do the least. They talk, they debate, they fight. But at the end of the day, what have they actually built? Meanwhile, the people who shape the world are too busy creating to waste time arguing. That's the Overman. That's self-mastery. It's not about convincing others to believe in you. It's about becoming so undeniable that they don't have a choice. So here's the challenge. The next time you feel the urge to argue, pause. Ask yourself, would my energy be better spent proving myself or improving myself? Choose growth over debate. Choose action over words. Because in the end, the loudest voices fade, but the strongest lives leave a legacy. Live in a way that speaks so loudly that you never have to raise your voice. That's Nietzsche's wisdom. That's power. And that's a life worth living. Forget arguing. Forget proving yourself. Become something so real, so strong, so fully yourself that you don't need to. Now go. Live your argument.